This video will be going over the different tool holders that you'll be using in the CNC vertical machining centers. So for the most part, they're not too different than what you have been using in the manual machines. We have two different types of drill chucks. You have a precision chuck and you have a Jacobs chuck. The precision chucks, you got to be a little careful with when you're using them. They have a tendency to loosen up, especially some of the older ones that maybe aren't quite as precision anymore. So they do work good for edge finding, center drilling, but if you get into try to avoid them when you're using drills, especially when you get up over 5/16 of an inch, say. You have your Jacobs chuck. Everybody's used those pretty extensively on the manual. And then what we have for our taps, we like holding them in what they call floating holders. If you notice that floats up and down, okay? So there's a number of different adapters, and they all have an adapter for each size of thread, or each size of your tap. So if you find the proper adapter, it just kind of fits in there. It only fits in there one way. It snaps in there, okay? So now it's not going to come out. If you want to replace that, you just hold this center down, and that slides out. There is a few different styles of these, but they all work about the same. Just got to hold that center, and it slides out. Slide it in, just find it, rotate it around, and it pops in. And as far as them going on the holders, you just line up the notches, snaps it down, and now this floats in and out, okay? So what that does is that allow for any minor miscalculations as far as the mill feeding and the RPMs. If it feels a little resistant, it has that room to float instead of breaking your tap off. To take those out, you just pull this down and it pops off. So that's what you're going to use to hold your taps. And then for your end mills, you basically have two different types of end mill holders. You have the solid end mill holders and you have a collet system. You definitely want to use a solid holder for your roughing end mills. And if you notice, there's a set screw here, and that set screw needs to line up with that keyway notch. So what you're going to do is you bring that in there, you kind of line it up to have it come down, and if you just kind of put a little tension on there, on that set screw, work it back and forth, and you'll feel it. There it goes. Now I hit that notch. And then if you just loosen it up and carefully, you should be able to feel it wiggle, but you can't pull it out. And don't pull hard because you'll end up cutting your fingers. So what you want to do is just pull it a little bit so it's on the bottom of that and just tighten it up snug. So now that is held in there, and that's the best way to hold a roughing end mill. If you try to hold a roughing end mill in a collet, a lot of times what they have a tendency to do is pull out. So you're actually going to mill deeper than what you want to. And then what's going to eventually happen, if it comes out too far, it's going to take out too deep of a cut, and you're going to end up breaking your end mill. So, and there's a number of different sizes for the solid end mill holders. 3/8, all 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch. We even have a couple 1 inch. And you can hold 1/4 inch carbide. If you can hold carbide end mills also in this if you want. Then we have basically 3 different collets that we have. There are a number of different collet systems out in the industry, but in the school here, we basically have 3. You've been using on the bridge ports what they call a DA collet, and we're going to mount a carbide end mill to it. For this DA collets, you just basically set that in there, get your nut on there, get it tightened. And you want to, for the most part, get that in there as far as you can. Now, maybe you're doing something special where you need to reach a little bit deeper, but you only want to stick out as far as you absolutely have to. And once you got that hand tightened, you're going to go into a vise. And there's a number of these vices around the shop. Just about every machine has them. There's a couple on the benches around here. And you're just going to take your wrench and tighten that up. Don't have to over-tighten it. It just needs to be snug. Another collet that we have is what they call a 100 PG collet. Okay, this is a little bit different than the DAs. You cannot just set that in there and screw this on. That will not work like that. What you have to do with these and the ER32 collets that I'll explain next are the same thing. You first have to have that nut off, take your collet, and that's going to snap in there, okay? So now that's snapped in there. So now I'm going to go, just get it on there, get my end mill in there, and once again I want it to stick out just past. So I'm going to bring this out a little bit more. If you can see your cutting edges, I want to make sure that all my cutting edges are below this surface so I can maximize my tool. What you don't want is to have that tool sticking out like this, and I know I'm only going to be using half of that length of that end mill. That's just something you're looking for trouble there that's going to end up breaking the end mill. So I'm going to stick that in there as far as I can, within reason. And once again, I'm going to go over to my vise. Use the proper wrench. And get it nice and tight. Okay, the other collet system that you have is what they call an ER32 collet. Here too, you want to snap that in there, okay? And then that doesn't come out. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up, get that started. And then you would go onto your vise and go ahead and tighten it up just like you did. What you don't want to do, and you will see this from time to time, there are a couple of the collets that are a little worn out, and they don't want to, if you snap them in there and you turn them up, they fall upside down. What you can do there is just hold this upside down, and once you get this started, the collet will be in place. I'm going to show you the wrong way to mount this in there. If you were to put that in there first, and you'd have this, I'm already too tight. There. You notice how this is not flush with that anymore. That means that this will actually end up breaking that collet, because that collet's going to want to try to compress too much on there, and the gapping won't be right, and it'll actually end up breaking that collet, and they're hard to get apart then. So that if you do see that, if somebody else had set one up, please take it apart, and if you need help, please come and get me. We can get it straightened out. But that's not what you want to see, so if that is the case, just kind of take it apart. Go ahead and snap it back in. And then you can go from there. You notice how this is flush now up to the top. So, and you go ahead and tighten it up on there. The other thing you want to be aware of is what they call retention knobs. Okay? This is what the machine actually hangs on to the end mill, onto the tool holder. The taper is what locates it exactly in the center. There's little claws inside the machine that grabs that and pulls that up in there, okay? For the Haas machine, you have this longer one, just like this. If you were going to be using the Mazak center, you need a shorter retention knob, okay? You want to make sure you do not put this tool holder with the longer retention knob into the Mazak and vice versa. So you want to make sure you have the proper retention knob for the machine that you're using. If you need to change that, let's say if I want to use this tool holder, it's the exact same taper, they're both 40 tapers, which this is. I come over to the vise and there should be a socket wrench that fits that. Loosen that up. Take my retention knob for the Mazak, if that's where I'm going. It's the same wrench that'll fit that. And here too, you want to make sure these are fairly tight, because you do not want that loosening up, and if that would loosen up in there, it actually can break some parts inside the spindle. So now this tool holder would be set to go into Mazak, and it would be the proper retention knob, but it could not go back into the Haas. So that's one thing you want to make sure: you have the proper retention knob and the proper tool holder, and if you're using the collet system, that the collets are mounted in there correctly. So that should cover all the basic tool holders that you'll be using on our vertical machining centers.